Last year, this crazy story happened to me. My buddy, Mike, is pretty deep into the music scene, especially within the dance and electronic genres along the East Coast, mostly New Jersey and New York. Honestly, what him and his crew have pulled off in just a couple of years is pretty impressive. So here's the gist. His company throws these big events at some of the most popular clubs, usually the most well-known spots in whatever city they're in. They hire top-tier DJ talent, often pretty famous or even borderline celebrity DJs, to perform at these nights. Now, I don't really follow that scene closely myself, so I don't know every DJ they've booked, but I can tell you they've had some pretty major names on their lineups. Mike and I go way back more than 20 years, actually. I've known him basically my entire life, and he's been my best friend forever. Because of that, he usually just lets me chill in the VIP section, hang out with the talent, all free of charge. It's a pretty sweet setup, honestly, and I wish I showed more gratitude for it. So, the weekend of July 4th, Mike was scheduled to host a huge event down at the Jersey Shore. This was supposed to be their biggest one yet, and all of our mutual friends were going. Mike invited me to come down early to help out and kick back with him, and of course, I didn't turn that down. We drove him, and our buddy Ryan about an hour and a half, and we got there about 4 hours before the doors opened. While Mike's team was setting up, Ryan and I didn't have much to do, so we decided to get a head start on the free drinks they were offering, all the booze you could want. We definitely made the most of it. By the time the opening DJ started, Ryan and I were definitely feeling pretty good, more than a little tipsy, I'd say. It was 4th of July weekend, after all, so we felt justified in our reckless fun. A few hours later, we were both completely hammered. I honestly can't remember the last time I was that drunk. Not even close. Now, I want to make it clear. Ryan and I are adults who can handle our drinks. Getting sick or acting like fools wasn't the issue. The real problem was impulse control, or rather, the lack of it, and poor judgment. But we were having a blast, at least, that's what I remember. As the night drew to a close, it was around that point where you realize it's either time to figure out how to get home, or who you're going home with, or maybe both. Mike had rented an Airbnb nearby, and he promised both Ryan and me that we'd have a place to crash, so that wasn't a concern. The real thing on my mind, though, was the second problem: who I was going home with. We danced our way over to the bar and struck up conversations with some girls we found attractive. Before long, we figured out which one each of us would be back at the house with for the night. Neither of us are supermodels, but we're both over 6 feet tall. Interestingly, most guys around the Jersey Shore tend to be shorter than average, so being tall is a pretty big advantage for us in that scene. And oddly enough, for some reason, most girls on the shore seem to fixate on height more than anything else, more than looks, personality, or intelligence. I still can't wrap my head around why that's a thing. The two girls whose names I think were Gianna and Marcella introduced themselves to us around then, but that's where my memory gets foggy. I could be off on their names, honestly. From what I remember, Marcella was the one who suggested we leave together and keep the party going elsewhere, which Ryan and I weren't about to argue with. Gianna handed us drinks, insisting we get on her level first, despite the fact that I was already pretty tanked. The drinks must have been strong because I definitely felt it. Now, I know it's a little unorthodox and maybe even shady for girls to buy guys drinks, but these two girls looked like they had serious money, dressed very nicely. After we chugged the drinks, we headed toward the exit. As soon as we stepped outside, Marcella suggested we go back to her place, which was close by, literally right on the beach. That caught me off guard. I was fully expecting to go back to our Airbnb, where the guys usually hosted, but both girls insisted that Marcella's beach house was nicer than anything we'd found inland. She made a pretty good point, so neither Ryan nor I put up much of a fight. We strolled along the beach, talking the whole way. The girls seemed really intelligent and articulate, which surprised me. I was used to just talking about nightlife and dumb stuff. It was actually refreshing to talk about something else. I remember feeling kind of embarrassed about how drunk I was because I couldn't articulate myself well and just looked like an idiot. That's when I noticed I was feeling even worse, like my body was melting, or I was about to collapse under my own weight. My legs felt flimsy, almost like cardboard, and moving my limbs, mouth, or eyes became more and more difficult. My extremities even started to feel numb at one point, but then just as quickly as it came, the sensation disappeared, and I was back to feeling pretty drunk. When we arrived at Marcella's house, I'd be lying if I said I didn't think it was incredible. It looked like something you'd see in a Magazinia luxurious beach house. We took off our shoes and went inside, finding ourselves in what I guess was the living room. Honestly, I say guess, because everything in there was just so over-the-top designed, kind of minimalistic, but with sculptures and fancy decor. Nothing felt cluttered, though. It was like everything just flowed together. I wished I had the presence of mind to take a photo, but my brain was definitely elsewhere. Ryan and Marcella disappeared somewhere in that fancy house pretty quickly, leaving me alone with Gianna. Then she leaned in and tried to kiss me. That's the last thing I clearly remember before blacking out. Not her actually kissing me, but her leaning in. That's where everything gets fuzzy. I don't remember feeling woozy or drinking more. I have a ton of blank spotches of my memory just gone. What's weirder is I know I didn't pass out because I still have text on my phone proof I was conscious, even sending messages. But I have zero recollection of doing any of it. And this isn't your usual blackout. Those times I blacked out before, I still had fragments of the night, the weird moments, the feelings. With this night, I have nothing but silence. Ryan experienced the same thing at pretty much the same time, which makes it even more strange. The next thing I recall was waking up under the sun, in some random bushes over an hour away from where everything happened. I didn't even realize where I was at first. My phone wasn't in my pocket. Actually, nothing was in my pockets. My wallet and keys were both gone, and at this they weren't even my clothes. I was wearing someone else's stuff. Not Ryan's either. Just some random guy's clothes. The only thing I still had was my shoes. Both shoelaces were gone and they were soaked. My head was pounding and I felt disoriented as if I'd just been knocked out or drugged. I didn't get up right away. I just stared at the sky trying to figure out where I was. Bushes, someone else's clothes, no wallet, no phone, no keys. My shoes looked like I'd been in water, but I didn't smell like salt water or chlorine. The worst part was the complete blankness, no memory past Gianna leaving. Panic immediately set in. I wasn't just hungover anymore, I was genuinely scared. I had no idea how I ended up there. What if I'd gotten into a fight? Crashed my car? Maybe I'd been drugged. I stood up and looked around. There was no familiar landmark, no town, just endless trees. Maybe 300 yards away was a 7-Eleven, the only thing I could see. I hurried straight there and asked the clerk if I could use his phone. My own had been stolen. He hesitated for a second, probably thinking I was scamming him, but then he slid the phone across the counter. The first number I dialed was my sister's. I didn't want to call my parents. They're more conservative, I guess. My sister picked up right away, and I tried to explain what little I remembered. She ended up giving me Ryan's number, which I tried calling several times, but it went straight to voicemail. That's when I started freaking out. I wondered if Ryan was in the same boat, if he'd been drugged, robbed, abandoned in some bushes just like me. I was about to call the cops when, out of the blue, Ryan walked into the same 7-Eleven. We just stared at each other for a second, then high-fived. He told me his version of what happened, and it was almost identical to mine. Same story, same confusion. That's when we knew we had to involve the police. We called them right there outside the store, made sure to thank the clerk. They took us seriously at first, but then their questions started sounding skeptical, like, "Are you sure you just drank too much? Maybe you wandered off and passed out somewhere." They weren't accusing us outright, but it was clear they weren't buying it entirely. I pointed out that we couldn't have wandered off into an unknown town on foot, and that it was unlikely we'd get through that without help. I gave them my sister's number, asking them to call her. She was already tracking my phone through Find My iPhone, and lo and behold, my phone was showing up in a parking lot a few miles away, just a few minutes' drive from where I woke up. Sure enough, when the cops came, they found both our phones sitting on the pavement side by side. That was a relief, but it also just reinforced their theory. We'd been drinking, lost track of time, and maybe gotten robbed. They weren't convinced we'd been forcibly robbed or that anything sinister had happened. They only believed we lost our wallets and phones the same way, possibly while drunk. I asked if they could check out that house Marcella had brought us to, but they weren't interested. They told us we were probably too drunk to remember correctly, or that we just lost stuff. One officer even said, "There's more going on than you think," but then handed us their cards and told us to call if we remembered anything else. After they left, I finally scrolled through my phone. Oddly enough, I found a bunch of texts I'd sent earlier, normal stuff, nothing weird, messages to my sister, my parents, some coworkers, some girls I'd been talking to. They all sounded like me, but when I looked at the messages as a whole, they didn't make any sense. Some said we were staying at a buddy's house. Others said we were just hanging at home, with no mention of the crazy night. I had a ton of missed calls and texts from Jimmy, so I called him. He sounded relieved but also surprised, like he thought we might be dead or something. He said he'd come pick us up, and in the meantime, Ryan and I canceled all our cards. Luckily, none of them had been used despite being stolen. All through the ride back, we couldn't stop brainstorming what might have really happened. Nothing added up. We'd definitely been drugged, but that still didn't explain the bizarre details. I read that most Rufus or whatever drugs don't produce those kinds of blackouts, that they just make you fall asleep. I was conscious during that entire night, as the texts prove. Plus, why rob us and then not use our credit cards? Why follow two guys just hanging around a beach town? Jimmy even wondered if we'd been targeted, but since the girls approached us, that didn't really make sense. Neither of us was perfect, but we definitely approached them. They didn't approach us. And then there was the strange fact we suddenly found ourselves in some random town an hour away, dressed in someone else's clothes. Crazy as it sounds, Ryan and I checked ourselves for injuries, thinking maybe we'd been physically harmed or even had organs taken out or something equally nuts. But nothing. Maybe they'd just given us some kind of exotic drugs. That would explain some things, but who drove us there? Who swapped our clothes? We never got real answers, but I couldn't just forget about it. We even went back to that house on the beach just to see if we could find it again. Ryan and I parked nearby, walked up the walkway and rang the doorbell. An old man answered, and I kept it simple, asking if a girl named Marcella or someone like her lived there, or if he had a granddaughter around our age. He said no, and I made up a quick story about a girl who was lying about owning the house. It was enough to make him laugh. Still, I walked away feeling sick, not exactly scared, but just deeply uncomfortable, like something terrible had truly happened that I'd never fully understand. For a long time after that, I was convinced those girls had been involved in something way bigger, maybe even kidnapping us, or worsened. Decided not to go through with it at the last minute. I don't have any proof beyond that gut feeling, but I've carried this story around for a while. If anything else ever happens, I'll definitely send an update.